Welcome to Making Special Education Actually Work, an online publication presented in blog and podcast form by KPS for Parents. As an added benefit to our subscribers and visitors to our site, we're making podcast versions of our text-only blog articles so that you can get the information you need on the go by downloading and listening at your convenience. We also occasionally conduct discussions with guest speakers via our podcast and transcribe the audio into text for our followers who prefer to read the content on our blog, where the use of visual aids, legal citations, and references to other websites are used to better illustrate our points and help you understand the information. These tools appear in the text-only portion of the blog post of which this podcast is a part. You will hear a distinctive sound during this podcast whenever reference is made to content that includes a link to another article, website, or download. Please refer back to the original blog article to access these resources. Today is July 14, 2025. This post and podcast is titled, They Already Know, School Refusal After ICE Raids and the Legal Duty to Respond, in which we share strategies to support the mental and emotional health needs of children recently traumatized by the ICE raids in California using public education resources. The recent ICE raids in Ventura County, where we are located, has prompted us to engage with other local community leaders to address the needs of the families that have been impacted. In particular, we are providing technical assistance and guidance to other activists about how public education resources can be leveraged to support the children left traumatized by the ICE raids, many of whom are too afraid to go to school now. In 2019, the Ventura County SELPA provided professional development on how to distinguish between disability-related school refusal and truancy. They warned districts that emotional distress, including trauma, can keep children from school and that school refusal should not be treated as willful defiance. That training still applies today. In fact, it applies even more urgently in the wake of recent immigration raids that have left many children too afraid to return to school. And under state and federal law, school districts and charter schools are already obligated to act. I want to share with you a PowerPoint presentation that was shared with me many years ago by a colleague at the time who worked at the Ventura County Special Education Local Plan Area, or SELPA. I've converted it to a video with my verbal input as to the contents as they relate to the ICE raids, which I'm not going to transcribe here. If you're reading this post, you'll have to watch the video. If you're listening to the podcast, it's not going to make much sense without the slides. I'm including a PDF of the presentation for download here as well, if you'd rather consume its contents that way. For the benefit of our podcast listeners, I'm including the audio of the video here. In 2019, the Ventura County Special Education Local Plan Area, or SELPA, prepared this PowerPoint presentation to train educators throughout Ventura County about the difference between truancy and school refusal behaviors arising from mental and emotional health issues for which local education agencies are legally responsible to address through special education or other supports pursuant to Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act and the Americans with Disabilities Act. One of this presentation's authors shared this PowerPoint with us shortly thereafter. She had previously worked with me in 2017 on a case in a local district involving a student with these types of disabilities who had been subjected to truancy proceedings rather than referred for assessment for his mental and emotional health needs that prevented him from attending school, which had prompted a special education due process case against that school district at the time. To be clear, this is the training PowerPoint from SELPA that was shared with me, and I am in no way representing its contents to be the work product of KPS for Parents. To also be clear, I'm not a SELPA trainer, and I'm just sharing a resource that was shared with me a long time ago. The point I want to make by sharing this PowerPoint with you is that they already know what their obligations are here in Ventura County because of this training from 6.5 years ago, and the children in Ventura County who have been recently traumatized by ICE raids, who are now either distracted from their studies by constant worries and trauma, or who are otherwise afraid to go to school for fear of coming home to an empty house or their parents getting grabbed at the drop-off and pickup line at school. All I'm going to do here is weigh in on the contents of each slide and discuss what I know about each item as someone who has advocated for children with special needs since 1991, supported attorneys as a paralegal and related legal actions since 2005, and worked as an educational consultant upon receiving my master's degree in educational psychology in 2013. And this first slide, as it points out, school refusal can occur at any age and is not the same thing as truancy. Truancy and disability-related school refusal behaviors look different. School refusal is largely largely a manifestation of anxiety, and anxiety arises when things become unpredictable or predictably bad. School refusal is reported here to affect approximately 1/4 of all children, though I have no idea where this statistic came from. There is no actual peer-reviewed research that backs up this assertion, and federal law mandates the application of the peer-reviewed research to the design and delivery of special education. This could be a typo or it's based on old data. As of 2023, the research says the number could be as high as 15% depending on how the relevant terms are defined. The more reliable number is around 5% based on research data from 2024. However, all of that predates the ICE raids that have been happening around the country, particularly in Ventura County, with the recent raid of Glass House Farms in Camarillo that resulted in the death of a farm worker. Approximately 200 people were taken in that raid, including a security guard who was a disabled veteran and U.S. citizen. There is plenty of trauma among the children of the affected families and those who fear they may be next in our communities to prompt a higher rate of school refusals in the affected communities. As with anything mental and emotional health related, how we respond to school refusal can increase the problem if done incorrectly. This is true with any behavioral intervention for any type of behavior. If avoiding the school over a prolonged period gives the child relief from mental and emotional distress, it becomes increasingly difficult to get them to return to school and will become a learned behavior of avoiding problems rather than dealing with them, which can debilitate a person for a lifetime. It appears that SELPA took this data from the 2017-18 school year. These numbers more closely align to the rates reported in the peer-reviewed literature, which makes me think that the 25% on the previous slide may be a typo that should have said 15%. Nonetheless, these are the reportedly real numbers based on what was happening in Ventura County 8 years ago. As you can see, school refusal is more common among young children and teens than among children in elementary and middle school. Presumably, very young children can have a hard time adjusting to starting school, and teenagers come with a litany of developmental concerns that become more and more complex as they get older, which makes it more complex to identify and support their many interrelated needs, not the least of which is the fear they may have of what will happen to them once they enter adulthood after high school. This slide compares the same year's absenteeism data against the previous slide's report of school refusal behaviors. This suggests that a blanket disciplinary attendance policy fails to meet the needs of most of the students who are missing school, given that most absences among the very young children and teens are due to school refusal, not excused absences or truancy. The more instruction a child misses, the less they learn, and the more they fall behind their peers. This sets the stage for a lifetime of underachievement and decreased self-sufficiency. Poverty, dependence upon public resources to survive, and involvement with the justice system are predictable outcomes, particularly when absences are criminalized through truancy proceedings instead of disability-related services and supports. The aforementioned student from 2017 was already in juvenile hall by the time his mother found me. When disability-related school refusals are treated as truancies, a service need is being treated as a crime, and children are being punished for being disabled. I want to be clear that nothing about truant behavior is healthy, and it's very common for school refusal to look like truancy, though not exactly. In my aforementioned 2017 case, the youth involved actually left his high school campus with a peer during the school day to go across the street to a grocery store and try to steal beer. The only thing they got was caught, and both of them ended up in juvenile hall. Both of them had significant mental health issues and were looking to escape and avoid the sources of their stress, which were at school. I was able to get the Caucasian peer into a residential treatment program through his IEP, being that he was already in special education, without having to bring in a lawyer. But we had to file for due process against the local school district, the county office of ed that ran the school and the juvenile hall, and SELPA just to get the brown kid assessed, which goes to my concerns about how all of these brown children are affected by the ICE raids and being neglected by their school districts over the very likely trauma-related reasons why so many of them are not going to school right now. It's possible for school refusal to look a whole lot like truancy with teens on the surface, which is why special education assessment is necessary to determine what's really going on. This slide pretty much speaks for itself, so I'm relating its content to the recent ICE raids. For our kids who are afraid of coming home to an empty house or that their parents will be grabbed by ICE during drop-offs or pickups, the underlying cause of the absenteeism is pretty obvious, and a lot of these kids will flat out say that's why they aren't going to school. I had a case a couple of years ago involving a Latino Latino middle school student with significant mental and emotional health needs in Ventura, whose father had been deported after immigration officers broke into their home one night and took him away several years prior. Since that time, he would regularly get up several times each night to check everyone's beds and make sure they were still there. This became a neurotic behavior that turned into a pretty significant problem that had bled over into other aspects of his life, causing him to have other mental and emotional health issues. The impact of taking a parent from a child is permanently devastating, and even though he is now getting the help he needs, he went for many years without it as the problem got worse before the family found me. I raised a bunch of hell, and his school district fixed it. I'm not going to get too deep into this graphic, but it's highly illustrative and useful to conceptualizing things. It effectively parses out won't from can't, which is presumed to be the distinction between truancy and disability. I know from my kid from 2017, he was hugging porcelain every morning before school because his anxiety tore him up so bad. He had esophageal scarring from the acid reflux and vomiting over a prolonged period. I've had other students sitting on porcelain every morning instead with anxiety-induced diarrhea. Stomach problems, in my experience, are the most common somatic symptoms, but migraine headaches can also occur. The thing most people fail to conceptualize, whether it's intentional or not, is that all behaviors are communication. All language is just learned behaviors. Behavior problems arise in the absence of adequate coping skills, which may be simply due to how young and inexperienced a person is, and not because they can't learn those skills in time. In other instances, pre-existing impairments like ADHD, autism, learning disabilities, and speech and language disorders can make it hard to develop adequate coping skills, which just means the intervention need is that much greater. Post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, is a handicapping condition all by itself, and other pre-existing conditions just compound and are compounded by PTSD. This slide says its data comes from Boston Children's Hospital, though I'm not sure from when or how current it remains. I don't know that school refusal is more common in girls than boys. It's been pretty even in my experience. I'm willing to believe that it's easier for boys to be identified as truant when they are actually engaging in school refusal for disability-related reasons. My guy was in juvenile hall in 2017 for disability-related school refusal that was treated as truancy by his school district until I showed up. This entire PowerPoint was created in part by one of the former administrators from his district involved in that debacle, who ended up leaving the district for a SELPA job and subsequently making this PowerPoint that she later sent to me. Here, the underlying causes of school refusal among our students affected by the ICE raids can be traced to a recent life change or triggering event. If only it was something as banal as a new school or a new sibling. I think it's safe to say that having one's parents kidnapped by secret police and spirited away to unknown locations by armed assailants is a far more triggering event than anything SELPA contemplated when it made this PowerPoint presentation. All of the advice on this slide is good, and I'm very glad to see it recommending assessments because that's the right thing to do. I'm not sure how therapeutic supports differ from behavioral supports because behavioral supports are part of a therapeutically appropriate intervention. I think this was meant to suggest that psychological counseling paired with behavioral support services are likely needed. A lot of the advice on this slide aligns with the guidance given on conducting trauma-informed assessments, which I've talked about before. You can learn more about that in one of our previous articles that I'll link to below this video. I think this slide, which describes intervention strategies, assumes that the student is on an IEP or a 504 plan because none of these things would happen without such a document, and it's coming from SELPA, which exists to support the needs of children with special needs in the public schools throughout the county. These are all instructional guidance and accommodations that can be offered through an IEP or a 504 plan. The irony with this slide is that, to my knowledge, none of this is already happening in Ventura County. Every local education agency in the county is on a countywide computer system that automatically spits out "fuck you" attendance letters, otherwise referred to as a Student Attendance Review Team, SART, or Student Attendance Review Board, SARB letters, that threaten families with criminal prosecution if they don't send their kids to school, and none of it offers help to families struggling with school refusal behaviors due to mental or emotional health issues that might require special ed or 504 supports. Families who don't understand their rights, which is most of them, may become punitive towards the child with disabilities who is engaging in school refusals because of the threats of criminal prosecution and the consequences that could come from it, which only makes things worse. It would be nice if SELPA and its member districts actually followed its own advice. This slide gets more deeply into the issue of special education students on IEPs with school refusal behaviors. The Some Educational Benefits Standard is outdated from Rowley, but they cite Indrew here, which is the more recent authority and replaces the previous standard of a basic floor of opportunity with some educational benefit. Indrew holds local education agencies to a standard of reasonably ambitious in light of the students and unique circumstances. I don't know what they were smoking over at SELPA when they wrote that into this slide. Home hospital instruction comes in two forms. One, temporary disability, which requires all of the things described on this slide for placing a student on home instruction. And two, special ed placement determined to be the least restrictive environment in which the student can receive meaningful educational benefits, which doesn't automatically require anything in writing from a doctor, though it doesn't hurt. The thing to understand here is that the first kind of home hospital for temporary disability is a general education accommodation that can be used by a gen ed kid who breaks his leg on a skiing trip as easily as a kid on an IEP who has to take 6 weeks away from school to recover from severe anxiety before coming back. There has to be an IEP meeting about it for the kid on an IEP, but it's still a temporary disability with an anticipated return date. The second kind of home hospital is the permanent placement of the student by the IEP team into such a setting, just as the team might place a student in the general education class with push-in and/or pull-out supports, a special education class at their neighborhood school, or a special school for students with similarly demanding needs. Special education is a service, not a place. Where it is delivered depends on what is the least restrictive, most integrated setting in which the services can be delivered such that the IEP goals are met. And every kid's IEP goals are supposed to be written according to their unique individual service needs. For local education agencies that rely on average daily attendance dollars to survive, addressing the causes of student absenteeism is imperative to the continued existence of each agency. If the causes of the attendance problems are not appropriately addressed, they won't get solved, and that's not going to bring in the revenue needed to keep the agency going. For the school districts and charter schools affected by the recent ICE raids, the induced school refusals on the part of the affected children means that ICE is indirectly impacting the bottom lines of every school district and charter school in which these children are enrolled. Ethically, the focus must always be on child welfare. Practically, child welfare cannot be served by bankrupted public agencies. School districts and charter schools have a proactive ethical duty to protect the constituents they serve. Every credentialed employee has to take an oath of ethics as a condition of receiving their credentials. ICE's attacks on our communities is an attack on our local government agencies with negative fiscal impact in mind, which conforms to the current administration's efforts to destroy public education, trying to shut down the U.S. Department of Education at the federal level, and bankrupting local school districts through ICE raids that induce trauma-related school refusals that deprive local education agencies of the average daily attendance dollars that would otherwise come in. And there SELPA's presentation ends. So let's talk about what this means and what we recommend for families and community activists supporting them through this whole epic failure of democracy that we're dealing with right now. The above video explains the logic behind the strategy I'm sharing with you here. I've already shared the relevant documents with local activists who are dealing directly with the affected families. For families and guardians of children who have been traumatized by the ICE raids in California such that their access to education is now compromised, regardless of whether or not they are already in special education or on 504 plans, it is critical that they be evaluated for mental and emotional health needs that might require services and supports. This could include mental health services across home, school, and community settings, as well as in-home instruction on a temporary or ongoing basis according to their individual needs, as identified by comprehensive assessment in all areas of suspected disability and unique student need. There are 4 PDF documents listed here for download. Parent instructions in English and Spanish, parent letter template in English, parent letter template in Spanish, and additional handout to share with local education agencies. Parents or guardians and their advocates and activists are encouraged to use these tools to create written correspondence that triggers assessments by local school districts and charter schools of individual children who are showing signs of trauma from the ICE raids that negatively impacts their access to education and/or their ability to benefit from instruction. Assessments are based on suspected disability, and trauma is a disability. The goal with this post and podcast is not to create a long-winded article for reading or listening. This isn't entertainment. It's useful information to help people protect the children in their lives who have been harmed by these ICE raids. Please use this information responsibly to protect vulnerable children in need. Thank you for listening to the podcast version of They Already Know: School Refusal After ICE Raids and the Legal Duty to Respond. KPS for Parents reminds its listeners that knowledge powers solutions for parents, and all eligible children, regardless of disability, are entitled to a free and appropriate public education. If you are a parent, education professional, or concerned taxpayer and have questions or comments about special education-related matters, please post a comment to this blog post at kpsforparents.org/blog. That's K as in knowledge, P as in powers, S as in solutions, the numeral 4, parents, parents.org/blog. We hope you found our information useful and look forward to bringing more useful information to you. Subscribe to our feed to make sure that you receive the latest information from Making Special Education Actually Work, an online publication of KPS for Parents. Find us online at kpsforparents.org. KPS for Parents is a nonprofit lay advocacy organization. The information provided by KPS for Parents in Making Special Education Actually Work is based on the professional experiences and opinions of KPS for Parents lay advocates and should not be construed as formal legal advice. If you require formal legal advice, please seek the counsel of a qualified attorney. All the content here is copyrighted by KPS for Parents, which reserves all rights.